In 1992, Sharon Stone was filmed in an infamous interrogation scene, and one leg crossed later, and the world was hooked on Basic Instinct. This intense for its time erotic thriller follows Detective Nick Curran, played by Michael Douglas, who investigates novelist Catherine Trammell after a brutal murder, where lust, desire, and ice picks lead the two into a very turbulent relationship in this movie that is the embodiment of guilty pleasure, you know what I mean? Of which, thanks to its raunchiness, back in the day, probably not many people were admitting to watching it, and yet everyone was still talking about it. So it's time to get tangled in this web of lies and seduction as we explore 10 things that you didn't know about Basic Instinct. So let's raise some temperatures as we check it out. Whoa. Number 10. Based on a true story. Kinda, sort of. Basic Instinct is the creation of its writer, Joe Estorez, who previously co-wrote the script for Flashdance. Basic Instinct's two main characters, Detective Nick Curran and Catherine Trammell, are actually based on two real-life people, to a degree that Estorez has met. Curran is based on a real-life cop that Estorez knew, who seemed to always be involved in shootings and other scrapes, but it kinda came across that he just loved it all a bit too much. So I guess not so much a cop who was passionate about doing the right thing, but maybe one who was looking for a thrill, with the more intense aspect of the job. Trammell, on the other hand, was based on a go-go dancer that Estorez picked up one night, where the two went back to a hotel room to do the spicy tango, you know what I mean? Where the dancer pulled out a gun on Estorez, and when questioned why she is doing this, she replied because that's all men want from her. And after a long conversation and coaxing, Estorez was able to calm this lady down into, not shooting him, and putting the gun down. Phew. Number 9. The script was written really quickly. Wow, and my voice went incredibly high-pitched just then. That's how quick it was written. Estorez wrote the script for Basic Instinct during the 80s, and all up it only took him 13 days to write this erotic thriller. And it seemed so hot and spicy that many studios were keen to get their hands on Basic Instinct, to the point where there was a bidding war, with Basic Instinct being in high demand. The script was eventually picked up by Corolco Pictures, who in the early 90s were having great success thanks to releasing a string of spectacular action-packed tough guy movies like Total Recall, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, Universal Soldier, and Cliffhanger. Incidentally, the script was sold for $3 million, which was actually quite high at that time, and something that garnered a lot of media attention. Number 8. Rewrites that were, quite frankly, a waste of time. Okay, so Dutch filmmaker Paul Verhoeven was hired as Basic Instinct's director, who had proven to have the balls for some pretty intense, no-holds-barred movies, with the likes of RoboCop and Total Recall. Like, these were two pretty intense, brutal movies for their time. Real shocking eye-openers in the art form of cinema. When Verhoeven got involved, he wanted to make changes to the script, and Gary Goldman, not to be confused with Gary Oldman, came on board to make rewrites, as he had worked on the script for Verhoeven's previous movie, the as-mentioned Total Recall. Original writer Joe Estorez didn't like these changes, and found Verhoeven's ideas for the movie to be exploitative, so he left the production. And well, this led to rewrite after rewrite, and it just seemed that they couldn't get it right. It was by the time the 6th rewrite was written, where even Verhoeven felt that things had gone a little out of control, and quote, really stupid. So it was decided to just use Estorez's original script, and leave all these other rewrites abandoned into the void. Wow, what an absolute waste of time! Number 7. The Search for Seduction. Now look, I don't know if this is true or not, but according to IMDb, the part of Nick Curran was originally intended to be a lesbian female cop with Kathleen Turner in mind for the part. And if that piece of information is true, the character along the way had a gender switch, with Michael Douglas getting the part, who was a big star and producer at that time. And Douglas supposedly took on the role because of the stigma of sex in movies at that time thanks to the AIDS virus. When it came to the part of Catherine Trammell, the production actually wanted a big-time actress to be cast in the part, and many actresses were considered, including Kim Basinger, Julia Roberts, Demi Moore, and Michelle Pfeiffer, but none of them wanted to play the part. Pfeiffer in particular felt there was just way too much nudity and wasn't willing to go fully starkers in front of the camera. Supposedly 13 actresses were considered till Verhoeven finally cast Sharon Stone in the part, who once again he previously worked with on Total Recall. Now she wasn't exactly an unknown at the time, but just wasn't a big star yet. But her performance in Basic Instinct was about to change all that. Number 6, tensions on set. Sharon Stone was apparently really anxious and insecure and struggled in the early days of filming Basic Instinct. I mean, you can't really blame her. It's a pretty kinky and raunchy movie to shoot. I can imagine a lot of people probably wouldn't be too comfortable filming this movie. In fact, Stone struggled so much, Verhoeven very nearly replaced her. However, it was decided to stick with Stone, where in order to film her scenes, Verhoeven would coach her to help her out with her acting. However, Michael Douglas then started feeling left out because he didn't know why Stone was getting this special treatment, and he wasn't. But Verhoeven didn't give Douglas the same level of coaching, as he felt that Douglas was already a seasoned actor who could handle all the material in Basic Instinct. So this led to a heated argument between Douglas and Verhoeven in a trailer, and Verhoeven got so angry he burst a blood vessel in his nose, which caused blood to pour out of his head, where everyone thought that Douglas and Verhoeven must have gotten into fisticuffs, but they didn't, and evidently the issue was resolved. Furthermore, Sharon Stone would admit that she didn't really entirely feel comfortable around Michael Douglas, and that she feels that he also felt the same way about her, and that this awkward tension between the two of them and discomfort actually benefits the movie, as it's reflective of their characters' prickly relationship. And wow, this movie must have been very difficult to film if you were shy and not entirely comfortable, as supposedly Verhoeven shot heaps and heaps of footage of Michael Douglas and Sharon Stone's love scenes. Yeah, there was a lot of movie coitus going on. Number 5, the leg cross that caused everyone to sweat. According to Mental Floss, when it came to the style of Basic Instinct, Paul Verhoeven and Michael Douglas wanted it to go in the direction of a detective novel, mixed in with a style that pays homage to Alfred Hitchcock. So, a noir Hitchcock movie of the 90s, only with more erotica. And nowhere are the boundaries between tension and lust more evident than in the infamous leg crossing scene, while the Trammell character is being interrogated by a room of detectives, where of course she flashes her bits. Now, originally the leg crossing scene wasn't in the script, but something that Verhoeven added, as this apparently goes back to his college days, where a female student flashed him in this manner at a college party to tease him or something. And there are even several claims that the interrogation scene is shot near identical to another female leg cross interrogation scene from a movie called South Sea Woman, which came out in 1953. Now, supposedly the scene was originally shot with Stone wearing undergarments, but Verhoeven asked her if she could take them off and go commando, as he explained that the undergarments were too reflective on camera, and so Stone shot the scene with no underpants. But, according to Stone, she didn't know they were going to use that take for the final film, with her Chamber of Secrets being on full display without her consent, and with the whole world to see. But director Verhoeven insists that Stone was on board with the scene and had no problem with it, and that it was her agents who didn't approve, as they thought that it would affect her career. So at this stage, it is kind of a case of he said, she said. We'll probably never know the truth. So, what time is it? Oh, yep, that's right, it's awkward o'clock. Number 4. Steven Spielberg was also paying attention to that scene, but for a different reason. Well, yeah, it seems that none other than Steven Spielberg himself was also paying attention to the interrogation scene in Basic Instinct, but not for the impeccable beauty of Sharon Stone, but rather the impeccable beauty of Wayne Knight. According to IMDb, when watching Basic Instinct, Spielberg knew that he was the right actor to play the part of Dennis Nedry for his then upcoming movie Jurassic Park. However, there was one problem. Spielberg didn't know the actor's name, so Spielberg had to go through the movie's credits to find him, and thus Knight was subsequently cast in Jurassic Park. And speaking of Spielberg, let's not forget the music of Basic Instinct was scored by the legendary Jerry Goldsmith, who also worked with director Paul Verhoeven in Total Recall. Back in the 80s and 90s, Goldsmith was increasingly scoring more fantastical family movies. So it's interesting, as he's a composer you wouldn't think of when you think controversial erotic thriller. Goldsmith would add that Basic Instinct was the hardest movie score that he had ever done, but would also add that he believes that it's one of the best scores that he's ever done. And going with the whole Alfred Hitchcock vibe of the movie, I feel like Goldsmith's score for Basic Instinct does kind of feel like a homage to Bernard Herrmann, who of course scored quite a few Hitchcock movies. And his music in Basic Instinct earned him Academy Award and Golden Globe nominations. Number 3. Basic Instinct was originally given an NC-17 rating. Going back to Mental Floss, as part of Verhoeven's contract, Basic Instinct had to have an R rating. However, upon being inspected by the MPAA, Basic Instinct was hit with an NC-17 rating, thanks to long, drawn-out sex scenes. Verhoeven shot multiple takes of the sex scenes, including close-ups and different angles, in anticipation that the MPAA would have problems with these scenes, so less offensive shots could be used instead. It was when, after pleading with the MPAA for the 8th time, is when the movie was finally given the lower R rating, on the grounds that Basic Instinct is a thriller. So in these scenes where Douglas and Stone are doing the old spicy tango, there's an element of threat that Stone's character could kill Douglas's character, or something like that, which meant the movie could be rated R. Yeah, look, it's a really weird technicality and I don't fully understand it. In addition to that, about 40 seconds did also have to be trimmed out, and voila, an R rating. Verhoeven was supposedly encouraged by the studio. You know, he was told, hey, we could either make $50 million or $200 million. You know, do the math. From the stories out there, Verhoeven seemed really intent on showing as much of the sex scenes as possible. So clearly this was a director who was out to break norms and conventions and restrictions when it comes to good taste. I mean, if you want further proof of that, just look at his next movie, Showgirls. Number 2. The Basic Instinct of box office returns. Basic Instinct was released in March 1992, May of that year in the UK, and it was immensely successful, making just shy of $353 million on a $48 million budget. Interestingly, Michael Douglas attended the movie's premiere with his falling down haircut, suggesting that he was filming that movie at that time. It would also become the 4th highest grossing movie of that year, just behind Aladdin, The Bodyguard, and Home Alone 2 Lost in New York. Wow, what a lovely box office performance. The movie got pretty positive reviews, with many finding it to be a fun guilty pleasure, a stylistic Hitchcockian thriller of old mixed in with modern-day sex appeal. However, not everyone was on board. Roger Ebert felt that the movie falls apart and drags when you find out the mystery. And a review in the Chicago Tribune said, quote, Verhoeven does not explore the dark side, but merely exploits it, and that makes all the difference in the world, end quote. However, Basic Instinct has continued to become a guilty pleasure and a cult movie, with the now frequently mentioned leg unfolding to be one of the most paused moments in history. Heck, that scene became so iconic and such a talking point, Sharon Stone even hosted SNL while reenacting that scene, but this time it was done for laughs. Look, I know I keep bringing up that leg scene, but really there's no avoiding it. Like it's the most standout aspect. What put Basic Instinct on the map, if you will. And it's all thanks to Sharon Stone's Number 1. The sequel that I think pretty much everyone forgot, or didn't even know existed. Yep, the story of Catherine Trammell wasn't over when the credits rolled in Basic Instinct. Jump to 14 years later, and a very late sequel arrived in the form of Basic Instinct 2 in 2006. Sharon Stone returned, but sadly Michael Douglas and Paul Verhoeven did not. However, a few years later, Douglas would return in another forgotten sequel to one of his movies. Now, it apparently took a lot of effort to get this movie made, as it was stuck in development hell for several years, which led to a lawsuit between Sharon Stone and the producers to finally getting the damn movie made, on the grounds that she was promised a fee of $14 million for Basic Instinct 2 or something like that. Yeah, going by this, the movie wasn't made out of love, but really legal obligations due to a lawsuit. Then there were several directors coming and going. At one stage, Die Hard director John McTiernan was hired to direct, but he and Sharon Stone couldn't see eye to eye, so he left the production. And at one stage, David Cronenberg was even being sought after to direct. Yeah, look, it was messy, where Doc Hollywood and This Boy's Life director, Michael Caton Jones, was eventually hired to direct, with the movie being filmed and set in London, taking the action out of San Francisco. And it also stars David Morrissey, as in that guy that everyone thought was going to be Doctor Who at one stage. It came out in March 2006 and only made $38 million on a $70 million budget, making it a massive flop. Wow! It was also trashed by critics and won 4 Razzies, including Worst Picture and Worst Actress for Sharon Stone. Now, I would say there was no hype for this movie at the time, but from my own personal memory, I don't think there was any marketing at all. Like, I don't remember it being advertised, promoted, or spoken about. This movie was like a quiet ship in the night that passed by and no one saw it. And just like that, it simply disappeared without anyone even noticing. Heck, I think that Pink Panther remake got more buzz that year. Personally, I think too much time passed. You know, the hype for a sequel wasn't there, with the window of opportunity for a Basic Instinct sequel passing after the late 90s. But regardless, we'll always have the original classic. The ultimate guilty pleasure. And sometimes that's all you need. So, the next time you investigate a homicide, maybe don't have liaisons with the main suspect. You gotta love how I'm saying that as if it's a common occurrence. Anyway, I'm Minty, and when you think about it, in terms of box office, Basic Instinct beat Batman, Riggs and Murtaugh, Dracula, and Wayne's World. See ya!